Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Welcome everyone.
I just want to say a few words at the beginning on how we're going to do this. I'm Natalia Sucre. I'm part of the Black Maternal Health Initiative from the library. So I want to say, first of all, we're recording today. So just so you know, we may put this video up to our website. Second, I'm hosting, I'm doing the tech part. So if there are any issues, if I will mute everyone, and also I would ask that people send me names so that I can take care of it. I'm just saying this because we've had issues once before. And with that said, I'm going to pass it on to our wonderful peer leaders, Lorna Thomas and Paige Lamont, or Paige, and they are going to lead us today.
Okay, let me first start by saying thank you all for taking the time off from your busy schedule. Some of maybe you guys are at work, and for being a part of this second discussion. Thank you all so much. Myself and Paige, two of the other peer leaders, have been working with the MCNY initiative around Black maternal health and mental health. So throughout this semester, we, the peer leaders and the members of the MCNY faculty, had the opportunity to discuss and continue the conversation about the public health crisis, Black maternal health and mental health, birth equity and justice. Over the course of the semester, we had a wonderful panel of guests, ranging from Dr. Melissa Barbara, who is the co-founder of the South Bronx, author of the 30 Day of Thanks, public health researcher and ambassador for the Button Project. We also had Jade Carnegie, educator and tech entrepreneur, co-founder and CEO of She Matters, a digital platform that provides Black mothers who experience postpartum comorbidities access to community, cultural competent health provider, and cultural relevant resources. We also had the opportunity to meet and speak with Bruce McIntyre, who is the founder of Save a Rose Foundation, a birthing equity activist working to bring midwifery-led birth center to the Bronx, and lobbying government officials to craft legislation surrounding maternal, mental, and surviving families, one of the central figures in the 2002 documentary Aftershock. We also met and spoke with Isabel Morgan, Director of Birth Equity Research, scholar at the National Birth Hill, researching infertility epidemiology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, researching fertility. Also, Ms. Morgan has co-authored several recent research studies on Black maternal and mental health. Again, let me say welcome you all. You're free to chime in. There's going to be information in the chat. If you have a question, you can raise your hand or you can put your question in the chat. So we are going to dive into the very first round of discussion. And I would like to now invite my colleague, my peer leader, Paige, as he dive into his piece related to this initiative.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. We're going to dive in. The first discussion is maternal and mental health challenges in the LGBTQ+ community. We're going to talk about the systematic discrimination against members of the LGBT community due to identity. And what I mean by identity is how people identify. Like I identify as she and her. You have trans men who also identify as a man, not as a woman. Even though there was at birth was a woman, but they transferred to a man. And they may still have parts of a woman, but their gender is a man. So we're going to also talk about discrimination against trans men desire to be birth parents. the unequal treatments around identifying in the medical setting as using one correct pronouns, as like I just stated, like people like to be referred as. We're gonna talk about the double standards and the mental health challenge faced by the LGBTQ plus community as it relates to the birth rights. And so I want to just share a story that a friend of mine's experienced as a trans man, being a birth parent. It's how a person's treated when they first come in, even though they identify as male, and they're the person who actually is carrying or with child, how they are looked at, how they feel discriminated, and the doctors choose not to use their correct gender, and that could be frustrated for a person mentally, very mentally, is very frustrating, and especially when you do correct people and you do go, by the way, you know, my pronouns are he and him, and some people just don't get it. And I love the panel discussion from last time. I want to say, oh my God, I don't want to get her name wrong. Jade, when she talked about culture in the community, and she touched a little bit on the LGBTQ plus community, which I really love. And I was actually having a discussion with her while we was in that session, because I wanted to know a little bit more. And as my friend was feeling this way, and I feel kind of, it's kind of upsetting a little bit when you tell people how you identify gender-wise, even though you may not look like the gender, but that's how you feel. And people don't get that. It's not how you look, it's how you feel. You can be male, you may, like I feel male, I'm a male, but I feel female within, and that's the way I feel, and that's how I identify. And, you know, I had to cut off friends, you know, who choose to keep using the pronouns of he and him, which I don't use. And, you know, I do correct people. I don't make a big deal out of it. I know some people sometimes forget, you know, they make mistakes, and, you know, so I'm not very like, oh, you know, excuse me, you know, but I do try to let people be aware that, you know, these are my pronouns and this is what I use. And I know some people, you know, or against it, you know, maybe because of religion or whatever, and I understand that. And I don't force anything on anybody that don't want to, and that's the reason why I say, I'd rather you call me Paige and you don't want to call me her or she or Miss. I understand that. I go by Paige, and and you know, so that would feel much easier for some people. So I just want to open up the floor to anybody for this discussion.
Hey there, I'll chime in. Thank you so much, Paige, for sharing that. I think it is really such an important part of this discussion when we talk about equity, because if we don't have an intersectional lens, then we're not really addressing the full breadth and scope of what equity looks like. And so I first want to thank everybody for joining us here. I see Lewis Bailey, who I haven't seen in a little while from We Act. Hey there. And I'll speak as, I am a birth equity advocate. I'm a community health educator. And I wear a lot of hats within that realm of health education that span from media to food justice to being a birth doula and a postpartum doula. And so all of my work is rooted in social justice and comes from a place of social justice and equity. And so I think that the perspective that recognizes the full breadth and scope of humanity, which also includes how people identify, is a really important part of how we educate mostly our hospital systems. It's really our medical industry that I believe, has to take the lead. We can educate ourselves and we can be in forums like this and have discussions like this, which are absolutely important. But I think that that has to be coupled with structures also taking the lead on how we change the outcomes of our maternal health rates. And so in the inclusion of LGBTQ and queer language, and even having staff within the medical system that can be called upon as a resource. So if we can pull in a doula, then we can also pull in, an equity, an equity advisor, an equity specialist, an equity counselor who's versed in this. Because as Paige said, everybody is not on board. Some people willfully, we do have a lot of willful ignorance, but there are some people who just don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. And so if we don't tell people that this is important and that this is an important piece, then they don't recognize that this is part of the full spectrum of equity. And I see you, Natalia, and yes, you can make me the host.
Yes, sorry, everyone. I really need to go work with the student. I just want to chime in before to Paige, what you say is so important, and it's been so important that you have been part of this group, and that you have brought that perspective to, I think, all of the peer leaders agree that it's really having that focus that come in has been really essential. And for me, I don't have my pronouns on today, but it has given me a new understanding of that, just to reinforce what Professor Robinson was saying. All right, so thank you all, and I'm going to make Professor Robinson host. Okay, let me do it this way.
One of the things that we say within the realm of feminism, particularly around an intersectional lens, is that if your feminism is not intersectional, then it is just the continuing of white supremacy.
Actually, some of our students have done very interesting CA projects on this topic. I mean, I remember one student who did a project on the blood center, the New York Blood Center, this whole thing of the issues around sensitivity around these issues and staff training, and, because there's some complex issues around blood donation that relate to, but in classes, it's interesting because occasionally this has come up, and it's interesting to have, when sometimes students have strong feelings about this, on both sides of the issue. Some people are feeling very like the organizations are making this such that they're making this, they're sort of making it very such a dominant issue that some people were feeling pressured by having to pay attention to pronouns and stuff like that, and things like that, and they were just feeling very, very stressed about it. So it's interesting, just the complexity of the feelings about.
Can I chime in a little bit? I also think we as a human species have to also look at the fact that we all live in a community that is diverse. And I think we have to learn or move more forward to respecting what people believe and respecting what they stand for. For example, Desi brought up a very important point. If you don't know, you don't know. So I can see one don't know, but again, if somebody is correcting you as to what he or she wants to be known as, I think that should be then taken upon you, the person, to respect that, right? Because again, just by not following what this person stands for, that can put that person through so much stress and mental issues, and the list can go on and on. So I think it's important for us to remember that we have to respect people, we have to respect people's choices. And I think in that way, we all can move on and live our life as beautifully as we choose to.
I wanted to say one more thing.
Oh, go ahead, Desi.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just thinking that, generally as we look historically at movements of civil rights, which are oftentimes born out of the work of Black people. And so, the civil rights movement really gave way to the LGBTQ rights movement, women's movement, and the third and fourth waves of those movements in terms of, equal rights and issues of justice. And I think it's really important as we move through this conversation, for people to understand that there are, and I think people don't generally like to say this, but we live simultaneously in spaces of privilege and oppression. And so I try to recognize, because I think oftentimes when you live in spaces where you are marginalized and oppressed in so many ways, whether it's through gender, race, economics, housing, education, all of those spaces, it's hard to think about making space again for someone who is further marginalized than you. And I think that's where we have a real sort of pushback and sort of fight around these spaces. We get into this kind of oppression Olympics. And so I try to consistently check myself by recognizing that as, one might consider fat, Black, dark-skinned woman with natural hair, I move through the world in a very different way than someone else who is thinner, light-skinned, and has a different grade of hair. But I also recognize that as a cis person, as a straight person, as a person who has advanced education, who speaks English, who is a citizen, who is able-bodied, I walk with a great deal of privilege, and I have access in ways that so many people who share some of my identities of being marginalized don't have. They don't have the voice. I have a platform by which I can speak. And so I think throughout history, we have seen that people do not like change. Whatever that change looks like, whether it is equity for more people or rights for more people, if it feels like it's going to take something away from you, then people have a lot of resistance, even if you are a person who is marginalized. And you can look at it, I think, in many different realms, even in terms of, being a poor white person. Poor white people oftentimes see their circumstances as being really challenged, which of course they are. And so the thought of making room or making space for people of color or people who have less privilege, for people who don't feel like they have any privilege at all, is a very prominent fight that we continue to have. So when they continue to make political choices to put people in power who amplify their own feelings of being marginalized, then they're being asked to still recognize other people who are marginalized, I think is the continuing sort of circle that we keep going in when we're asked to sort of make space for another group of people. I'm sorry to interrupt, Jania.
No, it's okay, Professor Desi. I was just going to add to that. I think it's because culturally, institutionalized, they look at it, everything is Black and white with them. So it's like when you start to add in colors and everything, then it's like, oh, you expect us to adapt to that. Why should we do that? So it's like, it comes to the point again, like we spoke before about the maternal thing, is about holding them accountable. That's something that's going to take change, because as you can see, they still do not want to even acknowledge us as having rights as African-American women. So it's like, it's something that you have to look at, just like we spoke about before, is getting the resources of safe places. Like Paige and, we can look at as peer leaders. What are safe places for the LGBTQ community where they can feel that they can start to have these discussions about reproductive rights? What are the doctors that actually agree with what it is that you're trying to fight for? And then once you start to get those resources together, then maybe you can build a bigger platform where it's like, look, healthcare system, this is something that needs to be addressed as well. But just like Desi said, when you have it come and every time you turn around, it's always something. And now it's immigrants. So you always have something that takes precedence where everything else falls to the back line. So this is something that you have to bring to your community that is already engaging and looking for the same thing you want to look into. Because I know me, when I worked in the healthcare sector, it takes that individual to say, you know what, let me acknowledge this person for who they are. But when you have an institution that's already Black and white, they see your name and that's what they're going by. They don't care if it says she and her, but in front of it or behind it, they still see Miss Lamont, Mr. Paige, and that's just the sad reality of it, is that it's something that is hard for them to come out of because it's institutional. So it's already kind of brainwashed in them to already address people that way. So that's the only thing I can state that we can start with, or, you can start is finding some resources of clinics and places that say, you know what, we are that type, we take colored people, we take pride people, we take all type of people, and we want to make sure that whatever y'all fight is that we're willing to fight with you. Is it that y'all want birth equality within y'all rights in y'all community? Because it is y'all right, so it's just about finding those little places that's willing to say, okay, let's bring more awareness to this and let's not push them to the back and keep it in the front, because that's how it's supposed to be. And that's the only way that change can be done, is if it's something that's constantly being pushed in somebody's face. Like, this is how it's supposed to be. No, we're not going to take a back burner to this. We're here. We're going to keep telling you we're here. And this is what we're fighting for. We're not fighting for everything in the rainbow, but we are fighting for this because this is our right, regardless of what. So I just wanted to say that.
And I just want to piggyback off of Professor Robinson, what she was talking about when it comes down to political, because I just watched CNN just a couple of nights ago about how trans and gay rights are under fire now in the House of Senate, what they're talking about. So that has to do, with our rights, even with, medical. I mean, it's a lot of stuff that's coming down. It's like, wow, we still have to fight for our rights as being a human being. I mean, put aside, you being gay or queer. It's like you just want to be seen as a human being, and it's so hard that it's so sad that people don't want to see you just as a human being, as a person. I'm gonna say, like, I know that one hospital, Janae, that I go to is like Presbyterian. They really they have like a system that they have like a form, and they put like, you have your name, and like they want, what do you like to be called? So when doctors pull up your chart, because I was really shocked, because like one day I went to the cardiology and the doctor was like, "Oh, Miss Paige," and I was like, "Oh, you got my my pronouns." She's like, "Oh yeah, it's in your chart." I was like, and that's so wonderful, and I wish all clinics would do that, like have a chart, so when you see doctors or nurses, they can pull up your chart, and and they can know what your pronouns are, or how you like to identify.
I know when I worked in a clinic, we would actually ask, like, is it anything that your preferred name? How would you like us to pronounce you? And we would actually note it in the chart, so that when your chart is pulled, they already see that that's how your name is pronounced. So it wasn't no having to correct them, because as Desi, we all know, is staff is colorblind. So it's like, at the end of the day, they just go by what they see. So it's like black and white. Well, this is Paige, this is whoever. They're not going to think about Sir, Miss Mercer. They're not going to think about that. So we actually used to ask them, like, even if your name was Steve, what do you like to be called? Or people would literally come out and tell you now, like, I like to be called Asia. So that's what we would put, prefer to be called Asia. So at the end of the day, sometimes you have that right to assert that on them, because unless you say something, they're not going to ask, they're not going to care, because they're just there to see you for them 15 minutes, even though you waited 3 hours. They want to see you them 15 minutes so they can shoot you about their way, because that's what they do. Like I said, it's all institutionalized now. Nothing is more individualized based. So it's like we have to push that on them, where we have them know we are individual and you're going to give me that individualized care because this is what I'm entitled to. And if you don't want to do that, I will go someplace else that will give me that care.
I think also we see it in forms that you fill out when you, for webinars and everything, that type of language is starting to be included. I used to be a case manager. I worked for Bronx Aid Services and I worked from Harlem United, but all the charts, even though Paige, as I'm seeing Paige, I see mail, I know that I have to call Paige on something else, and it would be there, this person, write it dead in the chart. So even if I'm the case manager and I'm not seeing that person, this is not my client, I already know how Paige wants to be addressed. And I thought we did that like intentionally. Like I said, worked in the Bronx Aid Services and Harlem United both. And it was automatically, it was part of the way you go about minutes. So even if I've never seen Paige before, I know how to address Paige. That's the first thing when you open up the file, you would see that. Even though Paige, again, you see Paige as male, visually, we don't call it, it's Miss, and that would be it. So I think, it's going to take some time, but people need to understand and slowly adopt as we go forward, because it's not going to happen overnight. The other thing is, it's also about language, I, you, he, she, they. But when you're talking to somebody, you can't change the they in language, because it's just not the way you grew up with speaking in language. You know what I'm saying? She did this, you know what I'm saying? You won't say they and another, it won't flow English that you learned growing up. So that's going to take some time, I think. But again, it'll take some time for people to move forward, but we just got to continue to push the envelope and make sure people are aware.
I feel optimistic. I think that with any sort of watershed moment that we have had, particularly in this nation, it has been met with extreme opposition, from women being allowed to vote to integration. And I think that it's very daunting right now to think about fighting for things that we fought for, 50 damn years ago, that we thought we had gotten straight. And now, we are renegotiating reproductive rights, something that we thought was legislatively a done deal. And so I think it's difficult right now to feel a sense of hope and optimism. But when I really look historically at, these really important changes that we have made to get to where we are today, none of that has happened without opposition, sometimes war. I'm not advocating for war, but I am saying that we have to fight. It's never readily handed to us. We have to fight for those things. And so we shouldn't have to. At 2022, we should have been able to see and learn from history that Paige identifying as a woman doesn't mean I'm not a woman. It doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change my biological makeup. It doesn't change how people receive me. But I think it's really difficult when we are consistently, when culture wars are consistently engineered. We're living in a time right now, particularly politically, where people want us to be outraged about critical race theory, even though most people don't even know what the hell that is, about banning books, even though people probably don't even give a crap about what kids are reading, about queer marriages. You don't believe in gay marriage, then don't get gay married. Like, people are really fed an ongoing feed of outrage, of things that we don't necessarily need to be outraged about, because it doesn't take anything away from who I am or what I do or how I live my life. And so, other than the fact that I have to be mindful now of someone else's humanity and how they want to be identified, that's not a big ask of me. It may be for some people, and it may rub other people the wrong way, but I do believe that we can march, we can fight in the streets. That's absolutely important, but we need to get to places of legislation and changing things legislatively. And that is at least a step in the direction that we need to go in terms of enforcing queer rights, women's rights, fat people's rights, Black people's rights, you know, and we want to see it across the spectrum. And when I say I feel optimistic, I think about the way that queer people are represented in media today. It used to be 50, 60 years ago, queer people were always the punchline. They were always the flouncy, you know, joke within the space. And now we have queer people represented in a much fuller arc. You know, they are within comedy, within music, within drama. And so I think if we look to where, you know, we have gone, Black people used to be step and fetch it. And now we've gotten to a place where we're physicians and we're seen as judges and lawyers and police officers and teachers. And so I feel optimistic knowing that we have gotten to places that we never thought we could be. And I know that we can get there again, even with the opposition that we're experiencing now.
I think Dejanay, sorry, you had, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Desi. Is there anyone else who want to chime in before we move on to the other?
I just wanted to say something really quickly. I really appreciate grounding this conversation and within a historical context. And I think it's really important, you know, as has been highlighted, that every time that there is a gain and a struggle for obtaining rights, civil rights, there's always a pushback. And it is really important to also recognize that the culture that exists within our medical institutions is a white supremacist culture. And a tenet of that is the right to comfort. And oftentimes people will say that they are uncomfortable or, you know, whether it's per their upbringing or religious point of view, whatever the case may be, that calling somebody outside of the binary that we have within our cis heteronormative patriarchy is something that they struggle with. And as was just beautifully said, it's a simple ask to recognize somebody else's humanity. It is also something that we have demanded from this white supremacist society to, you know, to recognize everyone else's humanity outside of a very specific representation, being white, cis, hetero male. So as we move along, and, you know, I think it's really important to hear experiences and stories, personal stories from people as they interact with within our healthcare system, and how the current, you know, resistance to this change of being able to expand our, you know, our, I guess, I don't want to say tolerance, because it shouldn't be a tolerance, but being able to expand our services in a way that are inclusive to gender representation outside of that binary. I think it's really, it's imperative that we recognize where that resistance is coming from, and how, you know, we have fought white supremacy and fight white supremacy to this day is, you know, with struggle, with resistance, and definitely naming it and holding people accountable too, for those who want to maintain the status quo. Because without doing that, we really are going to be stuck in the same place that unfortunately we have ended up now, where we're seeing that reversal of rights, and it is impacting birthing families. We know that the evidence is clear, and that hopefully in the future, you know, we will have more mandated training to include, you know, a gender inclusive, birthing education in our schools and within our hospital. But it's going to take a fight to get there.
I just want to comment, however, that the assumption that there's an intersection between white supremacy and gender sensitivity is, in my view, not entirely correct, because you're seeing some countries in Africa actually passing some of the most insensitive, legislation, and actually in the Caribbean and in, a lot of places that are minority, communities, the lack of sensitivity to gender inclusiveness is very, very strong. So, I just sort of, we need to have our own sort of, reckoning on this.
Hey, Janae,
I do.
you have your hand up?
I think that. Oh, I'm sorry. Dejanay has her hand up. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dejanay. Sorry for joining late. I wanted to piggyback off of what Paige and Bailey spoke about earlier in reference to, just basically being identified. I just feel like it's a basic humanity thing. Everyone wants to be comfortable when they go into anywhere they go, whether you want to be identified as Miss or Mr. So I just feel like, it's easy to give persons like, an excuse like, oh, they don't know, or it's something that we need to learn. That's understandable, but it's also a matter of respect and humanity. So when you meet someone, you should automatically ask them. The field of work that I work when I meet families, because I work in a homeless shelter. So when I meet families, one of the questions that I ask is, how can I respect you? And that opens the door for how this person would like to be identified, or how this person would like to be greeted when they're seen. So I just feel like it's more so of a way of actually wanting to get to know people and wanting to be respected, because I know everyone's mom taught like treat others the way you would want to be treated. I think that's more so where society needs to actually place ourselves. And then I think that we'll be able to progress. Because if you ask a simple question, you meet someone, hi, how you doing? My name is Dejanay. How can I respect you? When I ask people that randomly, they look at me like, what do you mean? How can you respect me? So I think that if we bring conversations like that, or bring meeting points like that into conversation, I think that we'll be able to progress. That was my little point I wanted to say in there.
Thank you. That was amazing. I totally agree with you, Dejanay. Thank you for that. I think we're a little sensitive with time. So we're going to dive into the second round of the discussion, where we are going to shift the focus to Black women giving birth. So Black women are more likely to die from pregnancy or child-related birth issues than any other race. Black women experience unacceptable poor mental health outcomes, including disproportionately high rates of death related to pregnancy or childbirth. Both societal and health system factors contribute to the high rate of poor health outcomes and maternal mortality for Black women, who are more likely to experience barriers in obtaining quality care, often faces racial bias and discrimination. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to experience pregnancy-related deaths than any other race, due to racism, sexism, and other systematic barriers. Let's discuss.
Well, I'll chime in, and I'll actually even connect it with, what Pamela had mentioned about some of the really oppressive legislation that we've seen in countries of color, but particularly in majority Black countries in the Caribbean and in Africa. And I would say, and this is a much longer conversation that we don't have to get into here, but much of the oppression practiced in many of these nations is really learned and adapted from colonization and white supremacy. In so many of our nations of color, women have been very central, particularly around birth and around matriarchal sort of conversations. So I would just throw that in there. But I do think that white supremacy has a very particular flavor in the United States, but it is a historical offshoot of colonization of most of the world's non-white regions. In terms of Black women and maternal health, I think that, I had a conversation yesterday. I sit on the Citywide Doula Initiative's advisory board, and we have been revising some of the forms that we use with some of our clients when we do intake with them. And we cover a lot of information around nutrition and family structure and intimate partner violence and, all of the things that we feel are important in terms of what happens with their pregnancy and their safety, but the reality is our numbers are really affected by the hospital system. And so whether or not a mother is in a domestic violence situation, if the hospital system is rushing to do a C-section unnecessarily, that is on the hospital. And so we have to recognize that we can educate ourselves and we can do the best that we can, and we absolutely must. It's imperative that we do that in order for us to advocate for ourselves in the way that we need to. But we really have to put the pressure on systems, on white supremacist, patriarchal, economically driven capitalistic systems that continue to drive oppression of all folks who are not white, male, cis, and rich. And so it really is a systemic problem. And so as a doula, I want to make sure that I have a really important interpersonal relationship with my client. But whether my client is on Medicaid or has a PhD and is married and has insurance, which studies have shown that none of those things have a great impact on whether or not they live after they have a baby. And so I think we have to really put the onus on our systems.
And I do want to add quickly, it wasn't a study, it came out as fact. Mount Sinai had 2 different wards for women giving birth. My daughter was born in Mount Sinai. If you had insurance, you were on one floor, and if you had Medicaid, you were on another floor. So I know specifically firsthand that happened. So I'm sure it's happening.
That is true. That is true. And being a most recent birthing person, that's what they like to call us now, birthing person. That is very true. So when I gave birth, there was a different floor that I was on versus a person who had Medicaid and no insurance. You could tell the difference in the maternity floor. You could tell the difference in the equipment. You could tell the difference in the staff. You could tell that on the Medicaid floor that the staff persons were newer. And you can also tell from the floor that I was on, we had more experienced staff. They looked polished and they knew what they were talking about, and a lot of things like that. And to the question that was asked is that I spoke about this last week, and I stated that, I received a certain level of care, and if I wasn't able to advocate for myself and for my health issues, I feel like I would have been a part of that mortality rate. I could have felt some shortcomings in, the healthcare system when it comes to Black women in health. And that's why I'm grateful for having that birthing plan and for having that medical provider that I did have, because she was always there to advocate for me. She guided me in the right way. If I ever had any concerns, she was always there. And then during my birthing, it was also, I was really reluctant to have, I had a male birthing person that wanted to actually do my delivery, but I didn't really dig him. And he was trying to be pushy, and he was trying to push me into having a C-section when my situation was supposed to be natural. And then when I actually stuck up for myself and I had my family behind me, like, no, she said she doesn't want to do that. We're going to do it like this. Another young lady stepped in And that's when she was able to like push me through it naturally and make sure that me and my daughter were safe. And, you know, I avoided the preeclampsia and the clampsia and the ending. And it was just like, I was thankful for that, because if I wasn't able to advocate for myself, have my birthing plan in place and have my family there to back me up, who knows what would happen, because there was so much going on in that one day. So I agree.
Thank you. And I think that's why it's so important where the conversations of doula comes in. Again, I shared my story before, and I'm going to share it again. 13 years ago, I had a son. I never knew what a doula was, never heard of the term doula. And, you know, I ended up having a C-section, and today I can say I regret it. I mean, I'm happy myself and my son is alive, but looking now as to the different services and resources that doula care can provide, I wish I had that service before. And again, some people are not fortunate to have support. At the time, I am from Grenada, so I don't really have family here. So had I had a doula with me, and Dejane mentioned, you had your family to advocate for you, and you yourself had a birthing plan. Again, I had my son at 23. I never knew what a birthing plan is. Now I know what it is. So again, I think it's so important. You know, we see the importance of doula here, because the doulas, they're trained, they're educated, they're aware, and they can actually stand up for our Black women, you know, and do what they need to do to get women to have more natural birth, because this is what we need, right? And again, I just want to say C-sections are an important procedure in the medical field. However, we can prevent them. You know, there are times when they're needed, but it goes to show how the system are so quick for women to have C-section opposed to having natural but vaginal delivery. And again, now that I know what a doula is, I stress the importance of having doulas, especially for our Black women.
I'm curious though, Lorna, you know, you're being from Grenada. My family is also, you know, heritage from the Caribbean as well, but they don't have such high infant mortality, do they? I'm asking a question. In Grenada, do they?
It is significantly low because the system in Grenada focuses on natural birth. For example, the system in Grenada, they don't opt to giving women epidurals because there's disadvantages to epidural, right? So this system in Grenada is mostly based on natural birth, natural delivery, holistic care as it relates to women giving birth, etc.
I mean, a lot of this is so, I mean, there's so many intersectional issues going on, actually, you know, I mean, I remember doing a study many years ago for the Department of Health in Brownsville, and you know, it was a nutritional study and looking at people's eating, and you know, just the low rates of eating fruit and vegetables, you know, and then I did another study that compared Caribbean. It looked at 3 different neighborhoods in terms of accessibility to different kinds of, you know, I mean, this was, now that this topic has become popular. When I did it, it wasn't that popular actually, but it, you know, it looked at accessibility to sort of greengrocers, supermarkets, gyms, and it was a comparative analysis, you know, and just the disparities between even Caribbean neighborhoods and, you know, Black American neighborhoods, you know, like Brownsville and so forth. I mean, it was interesting just seeing the differences. And then, you know, Sheepshead Bay, you know, for example. And so my point, I mean, one, New York is, we think of it as so liberal or something, but actually in a lot of ways it's, you know, extremely, you know, there's a lot of subtle issues around, you know, race and class that are so deeply embedded in the, you know, in the fundamentals of the whole way that the city is operating, that, you know, we tend to take for granted actually, but, and are very hard to break through. Actually, HUD sort of was recently trying to get people to do research around housing discrimination. And, you know, I mean, some of these issues are so hard to really kind of make a dent in, actually. So
Thank you. Desi, thank you so much. Pamela.
Hi, I was just going to say two quick things in response to Pamela. I would say that, I agree with you. New York City seems like it's so liberal, so progressive. It's one of the best cities, sort of culturally in the world. But we have some of the, the worst maternal rates in terms of Black maternal health. Black women are 7 to 10 times more likely to die than their white counterparts after a birth in New York City. And so there is, the mayor has put together the citywide doula initiative to really address these abysmal Black maternity health rates. And I would also speak to the issue of culture outside of New York City and outside of the United States. I used to live in Ecuador, and I remember being on buses where women would breastfeed freely on buses. And much older children up until, a year, 2 years old, they would be breastfeeding children. And this was the norm. And this was not something that was, frowned upon. It was just sort of an expected natural understanding of women nurturing babies.
Yeah, can I just say one thing? Yesterday I was out at like an eating establishment, and my daughter, she was hungry, so I naturally wanted to feed her. But my daughter's father and my dad, they're looking at me like, no, wait till we get to the car to feed her. And I said to them, please excuse my my expression. I said, I'd be damned if I wait for my child to eat while all these people were sitting here eating. Because I couldn't believe that they actually said to my face, like, oh, wait to feed her. No, I have like the whole setup where you wouldn't even notice what I'm doing, because it's just like, it's so amazing how like we've grown so much in society, and there's still some people that's just like, they just don't get it. Because if you're not gonna wait to eat here, why does my child have to wait to eat here? I'm not exposing myself. Nobody's gonna see. I'm just gonna think my baby is sleeping. I was
And that
upset
again
for
has
the
so
same
much to do
speech.
with gender. Deja,
Mhm.
that has so much to do with gender and how gender works within our society. Women are sexualized, and our bodies are primarily seen as sexual devices, rather than, the understanding that we can be both sexual beings and also nurturers of a human being, of a baby. It's a very sort of narrow idea of who women are, and that has a lot to do with gender oppression.
And also we look at all this multi-billion companies and industries who use women, sexuality, women body to promote certain things. So who are you to tell me I cannot use my breast, my body, to feed a child who needs to be fed? So we see it's okay to sexualize women, to put us to advertise, to make money, but it's a problem for us to feed our children, our hungry children, in a public space. So again, it just shows, I think, a bit of a double standard as it relates to women's rights again. And I think we need to actually move away from that sense of nonsense, I would say.
Yeah, they want us to have babies, but we don't want to extend the conversation beyond that.
Yes.
Yeah, we're not allowed to make decisions about whether or not we have a baby, but we definitely need to be having babies. And then after that, you're on your own.
You're on your own.
Also, we don't need to see what goes on there. Just do that in private.
Yeah. Kabrina, guys, I'm so sorry. We have to be wrapping up soon. I'm just gonna have to take one more person, and then we'll have to wrap up this discussion. Kabrina?
I didn't have a question. I was just going to piggyback on what Paige said about identifying as she, her, and him. That was a good topic. Thank you for that, Paige. And yeah, it's good to see y'all. I thought y'all was hosting, but okay.
Okay. Deshana, you had your hand up. I know we could take one more because Kabrina is pretty brief.
I just wanted to piggyback off what Dejanay said. The whole thing with that is kind of ludicrous, because if it was, and I hate to say it, a white woman, they just breastfeed whenever they get ready. They be on a bus, they don't care where they at, parkside, yes. They just whip it out and breastfeed. And it's like, I don't care who see my boobs, I'm feeding my child. Yeah. So it's like, I know that, sometimes we try to have pride with our stuff as well. But hey, sometimes we got to do like them and just whip it out too, respectfully, and feed your child in the crowd. Yes. Anybody else has to say, because like I said, we have to start doing some of the things they do, but in a respectful manner for ourselves. because I don't know about y'all, but I'm tired of being criticized for doing everything that they do, but in a more polite way, and then being called the angry Black woman. I personally don't understand that. Like, why is it every time we stand up for our rights or speak up for what's ours, we have to be angry? Like, why do we have to be angry all the time just for speaking how we feel? They do it. They get mad. We call them Karen. But hey, we angry Black women. Y'all could be Karens. I don't understand what's the problem. But yes, I probably would have just covered myself up and whooped that food right in my baby mouth and looked at them like, if y'all have any problems, y'all can call the people, put me out, but I'm not paying its bill. You know, something got to give. And I just want to say that this was a beautiful panel, and I greatly appreciate spending this time with everyone here.
Thank you so much. Time really flies when we're having fun. I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone who took the time to be a part of this discussion. I wish we had more time because we had a lot more things to say and discuss, but there's always another time. So on behalf of myself and all the peer leaders and the faculty of MCNY, I would like to express a heartfelt thank you. And let's continue this conversation. Let's put the word out there. Let's be advocate. Let's be our brother's keeper as we continue to advocate centered around the LGBTQ community rights, maternal health, and as we all thrive to become healthier citizens of this country. So thank you all so much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Lorna.
Yes,
and
thank you.
Paige.
Great job, Lorna.
Everyone, thank you.
Yes,
Great
thank you.
job. Paige,
Thank you.
Lorna, thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.